Okay, thank you, Afolabi. Well, Afolabi Imoukhuede is my name, but the book says Afolabi Imoukhuede. So that's my full name. I guess by that, it also tells you my nationality and the combination of my nationality. So in many ways, I'm a hybrid of sorts. My father, Joseph Imoukhuede of Edo State, Sabongidaora to be precise, of Igbo Rize quarters in Sabongidaora, and my mother, Olubumi Olayinka Imoukhuede, of Odogbolu, Ijebu descent, and so that makes me half caste Yoruba and half caste Sabo Ora in Edo State. So that's my name, and that's how the combination comes. So Sokweyi basically has a history from my birth till secondary school, till midway secondary school. But from senior secondary school till now, Afolabi took over. So it's always been a rivalry between my both parents. So understandably so, and as was expressed in the book, my matriarchal history of three generations, from my great-grandmother to my grandmother to my mother. And so there was, my dad, who I think was always on the losing side, because Afolabi was my great-grandmother and Sokweyi was him. And I guess as a man in the house, Sokweyi won for a bit, and Sokweyi was such that the dichotomy was anytime we're in Benin or when I went to FGC Warri, Sokweyi ruled. But once I came to Lagos, Afolabi ruled. And in his own wisdom too, I guess by the time I was going to secondary school, he realized he was fighting a losing battle. So he basically just said, back me on Sokweyi, Afolabi Imoukhuede, it doesn't matter. So that's basically, and so I guess the final nail to the order of the names was now my sojourn in America. You can imagine how even for Nigerians, Sokweyi itself is a problem. Imoukhuede already is a complication. So when I got to the States and they saw the three names, and my international director looked at me and said, you don't mind if I call you Fola? I'm like, yeah, that's fine. And that's how Afolabi ruled over Sokweyi, and that's why the order is Afolabi Sokweyi Imoukhuede. Now, the book. First and foremost, I think the reason for the book is a lesson from history. In my view, and as we got ready in celebrating 30 years of my father's transition in 2019, because he passed in 1989, I began to realize the importance of writings. And he was a writer, he's a historian by degree, and he wrote a lot of journals, and he had a lot of writings. But then he never published. And I grew up even with him in my few years that I lived with him, having a lot of his friends urging him to publish his story. And particular of his story and his writings was the Biafra story. And a lot of them at the time kept saying that he needed to publish his story on Biafra. I didn't know why. But as I grew older and as we prepared for his 30 years last year, then I understood why. And I think I pose it to say that if my dad had published his memoirs, which would have contained his Biafra experience, his Biafra story would have been the most unbiased. Why do I say so? One, he's not an Igbo man, so he has no reason to be biased towards Ojukwu or the Igbo story version of Biafra. Two, he was not a federal civil servant as you would have with Awolowo's story or his memoirs on Biafra that he was with Gowon and whatever. He wasn't in the federal service. Indeed, he started in the federal civil service before moving to Western region. So he wasn't a federal civil service. Number three, Midwest that he was in at the time was a beautiful bride that either side needed to win. And Midwest till today, which we knew as Bendel and later Edo Delta, still remains the midwife, still remains the beautiful bride that it is today. Even in the current, as we do this in the advent of the launch of the book, it's still in the current political play. The issue about Edo elections and what have you, it still speaks to the beautiful bride that the Edo Delta, the Midwest region was. So then, understanding that now, I understood that if he had written his own story would have actually been the most unbiased. And I'm glad that we had one of the 4 captives at the time who wrote the 888 Days of Biafra, which gave me a lot of context in writing my book. Therefore, why did I then write the book? It was important for me as a better version, or as an improved version, or as they would always pray, an improvement of who they were, to take that lesson on board, to be sure that I then published. And so that's one of the key lessons I learned about putting out your memoirs. Secondly, what we did with the Empire story in my time in my first term adventure in federal government or in federal public service with President Muhammadu Buhari is indeed in many ways novel. And I thought that it was important that we documented the facts, that we documented what we numbers people, because you must always remember that I'm an accountant first by profession, and there's something we call the facts behind the figures. We are figures people, but there are always facts behind the figures. And I thought it was important that we documented the facts behind the play. And those were the words of His Excellency Babatunde Raji Fashola, who did the foreword, when he mentioned that Afolabi has documented the rigors that were the back-end story of Empire. So whilst I'm still in government, I think it's also important to mention this. A lot of people, the norm is that when you have finished a particular race or a particular part of your life, you then feel that, okay, you want to rest on my recliner like this, and you want to tell your memoirs and you want to tell your stories. But I chose to reverse that, to say, while still in the race, the point is the political trajectory of Nigeria and the democracy we practice already tells you that there is what you call a full time, which was the first term 4 years, and there's another second term that is ongoing now, which is 1 year down. So I thought it was important that before it becomes a stale news, or before it becomes a recent history or a recent past, for me, I should quickly document, and that's what I've done with that. So for my readers, firstly, let me thank everyone who has shown great interest while the book was being written. I must at this always remember my darling mother, my darling Sissy, who on dining table during the lockdown afforded me the opportunity to have fast-tracked the publication of this book. And the lockdown, as we stayed together in the house, she will call me then Akowe Kowura, because at every point in time, whether it was lunch, when she came out for her lunch or whatever on the dining table, I was reviewing several manuscripts, and she will pick one of it and look at it, and then she will correct me on some story. Koribel, this was what happened, and things like that. So I must, and now she's joined the Saints Triumphant. So at every point in time that I remember the book, I must remember her story, because she was a critical part of it. It was also in this same place that she was interviewed in December, as I was getting ready my thoughts for the book. So I must thank everyone who's been a part of the journey, so the book in itself is just a dot in the journey that the book represents. And so it's not just about those who were with me in the process of writing the book, but those who were part of my journey that has since been documented in that book. So first, let me thank you, and let me thank as many that since the day it was launched, June 22nd, 2020, I don't imagine that it can ever be erased in my memory. That has become another important day in my milestone. Everyone who has bought and who is making progress to buy and who will buy, and as many who they will buy for. And so for all you, my readers, I think what is important that I want you to get is quite a few things. One, the trajectory of that book cuts across. You could look at the book and talk about lifestyle. You will not be wrong, because I think the many parts of it also represented my lifestyle. You could look at that book and see politics. You would also not be wrong, especially if all you read is chapter 1 and dropped the book. In chapter 1, I talked about the tsunami, and in that chapter, I just tried to capture what it was that the progressive politicians tried to do, and what led to the first time in history unseating an incumbent president. So you could look at the book and talk about politics, especially when you then begin to see the empire story and all that. So you would also not be wrong. You could look at the book and also speak about career. You would also not be wrong, because there was, I spent some time to talk about the trajectory of how my father wanted me to be a doctor, and how I found myself somewhere along the line and where I am today, which I won't let you out to go and read the book. You could also look at the book and also begin to speak about the core or the essence of life principles, which I did share a summary of it in what I've called the peer. And as I was going through Instagram, which I'm not a fan of, but because of the book, I've had to start learning the rudiments of Instagram. But I've been on Instagram for quite a bit. And so as I was fiddling on Instagram, just trying to learn the riddles, I stumbled on an Instagram message that someone sent to me. I can't remember the year, but the very day I opened, or around the season I opened my Instagram. It must have been about 4 or 5 years ago. And he wrote, "Oh, why Pierre 611? Well, I won't tell you, but the book tells you Pierre. I won't tell you 611, but the book tells you Pierre. And Pierre basically is the summary of my principles. Pierre in itself, if you check the definition of Pierre in itself talks about, a strong bulwark, something strong, something that is able to carry weight. And typically you hear piers when you're talking about the sea, when a ship docks, and what connects the ship, the docking of the ship to land is what is called a pier. And you can imagine therefore how strong a pier is. So for me, the full meaning of pier in itself, it's who, by the grace of God, I try to represent in the history of my life journey. But more importantly, the acronym of PEER is also a summary of the principles that have governed my life, which is passion, which is integrity, which is empathy, and which is R. R represents 2, resilience and responsibility. And so when you look at that as well, you could also say that, this also talks about principles, also talks about motivation and whatever. So the book is in many parts. So what I would say to you, all my readers, is find yourself in the book. I think the final thing is the fact that the book also speaks about the power of decision and the power of choice. So find yourself in the book, and I'm very happy to engage all of my readers through all the various social media platforms and through the various events and encounters that I will have in the next coming weeks and months as I journey around the country and a little bit outside of country, just discussing the book. The title of this book that we've been speaking about, so that you don't go pick another book and think it's my book. We may have quite a few lookalikes. So Imoukhuede is a big family, and I'm sure we've had a few other writers from the Imoukhuede family. This particular book, it's called the Never An Afterthought. Never An Afterthought. So for those of you who are the social media dynamics, it's hashtag Never An Afterthought, or on Twitter at NAA_book. So Never An Afterthought. So that's the title of this book. Why the title? I think I described in a few minutes what the book is about, or what I want my readers to get from the book. I guess from what I want my readers to get from the book, you can begin to deduce what the book is about. But the whole point, and that's the point I spoke about last when I said decision or the power of choice. So for me, in other words, the title of the book is basically the culture, the character, and the essence of the author. Never an afterthought. There is really absolutely nothing in that book or about me that is an afterthought. Absolutely none. Everything comes together because, first and foremost, yes, as the spiritualist that I am, the Bible says that all things work together for the good of those who love God and are called according to his purpose. So I'm a big believer in that. And so what it then means is that I've come to learn that everything is curated. And if everything then is curated, if you really want to have a good curation, then whilst accidents could be part of a good curation, but the greater part of it is that you are not an afterthought. And so my life journey has never been an afterthought, and you will begin to connect the dots as you read the book. What I learned writing the book? Well, a few things. And whilst I would not want to reveal my next steps, I haven't written this book, but part of my next steps comes from also the lessons I learned from writing the book. But one of it that I will share is the fact that it is not a journal. It is not a magazine. For journals and magazines, they are dated. They are timed. For the book, is everlasting. It's for posterity. And so what I learned that writing that book. And that's the reason why I enjoin a lot of younger people. I enjoin older people to read it. And I experienced it in one of the reviewers of the book who engaged me in some facts and figures and the dates as regards history. And so that's a beauty that's a banter I want to enjoy from the older generation who probably lived Biafra, that I'm writing about from my father's experience. So those are the banters I want to enjoy from the older generation. But from the younger generation, I want to enjoy the banter of them really engaging me, the man who behind the scene, engaging from the experience. And what, for me, therefore, the next, or maybe the summary of that, is that we really could begin to make a lot of, life lessons, life coaching out of this. So that's what I learned. I think in summary, the point is that it's not, when you write a book, it's not dated. When you do a magazine, it's dated. When you do a journal, it's dated, even though it is written. It's history written already, but a book is not dated. I'm currently reading Colin Powell's book that he wrote 8 years ago, in 2012. I'm reading it now and it's making so much sense to me in 2020. I've sat back a few years ago to read Awolowo's book that he wrote in 1959. So that's what I mean by books are not, the lessons and the wealth of knowledge to be gained from books are never dated. So, finally, for you all my readers and will-be readers, this is the book. And you will begin to see a lot of, maybe we should launch a hashtag called This Is The Book. And the reason I say this is because I've noticed a few of my good friends, Collins, my good friends and a few others who have started doing This Is The Book. And I see it all over social media. But yes, this is the book, Never An Afterthought. Let me say a few things about the pose. Now, this pose is a traditional Joe Imoukhuede pose, but I think it's in the DNA because none of us choose to pose that way. It's just unconscious. So typically this is my father's pose, but it's unconscious. It's now second generation. So that's what it is. But then the reality of it is that it actually matches the title, Never An Afterthought. I mean, when you see this pose, you know that this person is a serious thinker. This is a book, and like I said earlier, you can get the book from, the dedicated website, the Never An Afterthought.com. You can also get it on Amazon. For those of you outside of Nigeria, it's all available on any Amazon, Amazon.com, Amazon.co.uk, Amazon.ca, Amazon.fr. Wherever you are in any part of the world, just go into your Amazon there and it is there. There's also the Kindle version of this book for those who don't like to read hard copy but like to read on any of their devices. It's a Kindle version. In the coming months, we would also have we'll have it on Apple Book, and in a few weeks and coming months as well, the audiobook version would also be out. Yes, there have also been a lot of inquiries about the hardcover. Yes, the hardcover would also be out. I'm sure in another 2 months we'll have the hardcover version. But please, what is more important for me is that as you read it, don't keep the lessons to yourself. Go, if you buy on Amazon, get on Amazon, go share some reviews, because from your reviews, every other person gets to learn and is encouraged to buy. So I'm not really about the sales per se, but really more about you sharing your life, your lessons on the impact of the book on you. Also, for those of you who are very active on social media, please do a thread. When you've read it, I mean, you see what I do when I pick up books and I read, I do a thread on it, as I'm currently doing with the Colin Powell book titled It Worked For Me. So for this book as well, please, whatever you've learned from it, do a thread on social media. We would also invite you to come back to the dedicated website where you also ordered the book, especially those of you in Nigeria. You couldn't have gotten this book except you went to the dedicated website, or now there's some bookshops like Roving Heights. They also have it now. If you're in Abuja or you're in Lagos, Roving Heights, they have it. You can also order through their own social media handles as well. But what I'm saying in essence is, please come back to the website and share your reviews. My handles are also publicly available. On Twitter, I'm at AS Imoukhuede. So if you have the book, you can't make a mistake. A for Afolabi, S for Sokwe, and Imoukhuede. So you will find me on Twitter. On Instagram, the same thing, AS Imoukhuede. It's my handle on Instagram. And why am I saying that? I want to engage with you. If you have a different thought, if you have something you want to share, even if you oppose something or anything I may have said in the book, please engage with me. It's a lifestyle, it's a journey, and I want to share this journey with you.